Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Kaf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Ronit and Shlomo Ani in honor of their son Avichai Abraham's marriage to Shilat. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started. Today we have a lot of, I would say, famous things. We're going to talk about two very famous machlokot between Rava and Abaye, and the reason is because it's of one, actually two of the six cases. It's rare to have them both on the same page. It's the only time where we have them both on the same page. Two cases out of the six where we hold like Abaye over Rava. Otherwise, we always hold like Rava. And today we're going to get two of them, so it's like a bonus page. And then we're going to end with the sugya of krovim, of relatives, and we're going to go back to those who were in Yevama with me, right? Remember the Canva presentations. We're going to go back to similar Canva presentations for krovim in order to help them make it a little simpler to understand. Okay, itmar. So now we're going to get started. The very last word on kafaf amubet, eid zomem. We've been talking about all these different kind of people who are invalid, disqualified from being witnesses because we're worried they're going to lie under oath. Now, what about someone who was convicted as a false witness? Okay, so just like we said yesterday, a gazlan, which is forbidden to oraita, right? You don't even really need to mention because that's so obvious. Well, also an eid zomem is very obvious, but there's actually a machloket about an eid zomem. Let's talk about first what an eid zomem is. So the first thing, first of all, Daf Mishalahen is on this and on the whole issue of Abaye and Rava, and that we only hold like Abaye in a few cases, and specifically about this topic. So it went up last night. Okay, let's talk about Eid Zomem. First, let's talk about false witnesses in general. If two witnesses come to court and say the following happened on this and this day, and this person killed this person, and then two people come and say, what do you mean? The murderer was a different day, it was a different person who murdered them, and we have contradictory testimony. We have no idea who to believe. So in the end, we don't believe anybody, and nobody becomes a false witness because we have no idea who's lying and who's telling the truth. But the Torah came and said that if the two witnesses don't actually contradict each other, but after two witnesses come and testify, two other witnesses come and testify and say, but we were with you at that time somewhere else. And basically, all they're doing is testifying about the whereabouts of the witnesses, not about the content of the testimony, but the whereabouts of the witnesses then and saying you couldn't have been there. We believe those second group of witnesses. Now, soon we're going to see that theoretically you could say, why? Maybe they're lying. It's still the same of who believes them over them. But the Torah said this is the way we're going to believe two witnesses. Since those two witnesses could have come along and said those witnesses are thieves and disqualify them, they can also disqualify them by basically saying you're lying. And we were with you at that time somewhere else entirely. There's no way you could have been there. And then the first group of witnesses become edim zomimim, and they're considered false witnesses. So the big question is, if this were to happen, and let's say they testified in January, and in February they became edim zomimim, right? We didn't know in January they lied. From when do we disqualify them? From January, from the time they testified under oath falsely, or from February when they were convicted? And that's the machloket Abaye and Rava. Ed zomem. Abaye amar lemafreyahu nifsal. Abaye says, look, he was a liar from the moment he testified falsely. We're going to say from that moment on, any testimony. So we have to go back and see what did this person testify about from January to February, right? From, let's say it happened on the 1st of January and the conviction was the 1st of February. What happened between January and February, and anything this person signed on, testified for, all disqualified. Rava amal mikanu lahabahu nifsal. Only from the moment they became an idzomeh. So now the question is why? So Abaye amar lemafreyahu nifsal. That's very easy to explain. Me'idana da'asid rashahu. From the moment this person testified under oath falsely, that person is a wicked person. Vatorah amra. And the Torah said, Al tashet yadchaim rasha. Okay, let's read the whole, at least that section of the verse. Don't go along with a wicked person. Lihiyot eid Hamas. Someone's going and testifying falsely, don't join them, basically, in order to be an eid Hamas. Okay, Hamas usually means stealing, right? So we'll have to talk about what we learned from this. But right now we're going to darshan the pasuk in the following way. It says, Al tashet yadcha, don't have your hand go with a rasha, okay, which doesn't really mean your hand, right? It obviously means don't follow a rasha. Liot eid Hamas, to be a bad witness, an evil witness to do bad. So what do they learn from here? Al tashet rasha eid. This is the drasha. The simple reading is don't go after a rasha to be a false witness. But the drasha is don't let a rasha be a witness. Okay, if someone's a rasha, someone who lied falsely is clearly a rasha. Don't let them be a witness. From when were they Rishayim? From the moment they did something bad, which is the moment they testified, not the moment they were convicted. That's Abaye. For Rava, we're going to have two different explanations. The first one is this. Rava Amar Mikanu Lahabau Nifsal, Eid Zomem Chidushu. The whole din of Eid Zomem and the fact that we believe the second group to cancel out the first group is all a unique halacha. Okay, it's a chiddush, meaning were it not for the Torah to have said this, we wouldn't have said it intuitively. Because theoretically, my chazik da samach dahane, smochahane. Why are you relying on the second group instead of the first? Could be the first group is right and the second group are liars. We don't really know. And therefore, so what does that have to do with anything? Well, since this is all a chidush, we don't know if this real first group is a rasha. But when do they become rashaim? It's only from when they became zomemim. Because the Torah says if another group comes and calls them zomemim, right, and says, we were with them, so in this place, on that and that day, and they couldn't have testified, they become edim zomemim, but they only become edim zomemim when the Torah says, we're going to believe that second group. We don't really know. Maybe they really aren't bad people. So we're only going to say they're bad people from the time they were convicted, because then the Torah says we're going to call these people bad people. But when the time they what's the word? We think they lied, but maybe they didn't lie then. So therefore, they're only going to be Risha'im from the conviction. And that's Rava, or that's one explanation of Rava. Ikada Amre, some people say, Ravanani ka Abaye svirale. Rava actually really does hold like Abaye, theoretically. Rava thinks that theoretically you should only be disqualified you should be disqualified already from the moment you lied, okay? Forget the chidush. There's a different explanation. Really, we assume the Edim Zomim are liars. And from when are they liars? From when they testified falsely. So really, we should go back. What's the problem? If we go back to January, okay, maybe you already caught on to this. It's a little complicated. My tam ka'amar mikanu l'haba mishum pseida de la kuchot. Since we're now going to have to go back and cancel out anything that they testified about previously, this can be a big mess. What if they were your witnesses on the sale of your house, right? Now you don't have witnesses about the sale of your house. What if they were witnesses about a loan? You lent money to someone. Now you have no witnesses about this loan and you're stuck. You're never going to get your money back. Well, that's going to create a problem for a lot of people. They had no idea of knowing. Remember we talked about yesterday, hachrazah, about announcing it. There has to be some public awareness of it. Now, you wouldn't need to announce for an Eid Zomem because remember we said you don't have to announce for a Gazlan Doraita. And that's something someone's convicted in court. You should know about it, but you're only going to know when they're convicted. You don't know when they lied that they lied. So it's going to cause a huge problem for anybody who uses them as witnesses. And therefore, we don't allow it. So we don't accept their lying testimony. Of course not. We only accept other cases where they signed or testified about in the meanwhile. Okay, unless we have proof that there is zomemim in that case as well. But we're going to basically say whatever else. Okay, so on January 1st, they testified falsely. That testimony is gone because when the Edim come and knock them out, they're knocked out of that case. But anything else they testified about from January 1st and onward to February 1st to the day of the conviction, we're going to say it's fine, according to Rava. Okay, remember, we don't hold like Rava here. Okay, remember that. We hold like Abaye, and we're going to go back and cancel it out from the beginning. Now the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between them. Okay, what's the nafkamina, my benaihu? What's the difference whether you say, not between Rava and Abaye, it's an obvious difference between Rava and Abaye, between January and February, all the testimonies. What's the difference whether you say it's a chidush, and he really disagrees with Abaye entirely, or he really agrees with Abaye, but there's pseida de lekuchot. So when would there be a case where Rava would say something different? Ika benayu, dasidu beitre bechad, and I'm going to go with the girsa. There's an aleph here which sends you to the bach. Utre bechad. It's going to be a case. There's a bunch of different girsas here, a bunch of different ways of understanding this, but we're going to go with this. Now, what's the problem when Rava said in the beginning, my chazit, the samachahane, smochahane, like who knows who's right and who's wrong? We have 2 versus 2, right? And 2 versus 2 is right. 2 witnesses is what you need for anything. And now we have 2 say this, 2 say something different. We don't really know who's telling the truth. And the Torah chidsha lanu, that this is how we go. So comes the Gemara and says, what if we have 4 witnesses who came to knock out the 2, and 2 testified about one of them, and 2 testified about the other one, right? 2 said, we were with you, and two said we were with you. So now you have two against one and two against one. If you have two against one and two against one, then those two witnesses are knocked out in a fair and square way where it's obvious they're not telling the truth because we have two against one, and two always wins out against one in the court. So that would be true, and it wouldn't be a chidush. It would be an obvious thing. Okay? Inami, or alternatively, and then, by the way, but if it's pseida de lekuchot, then you have to worry about it anyway. Inami de paslinu begazlanuta. Now, this is a very weird answer, okay, and I'll leave the answers to the questions aside. The problem is we weren't talking about thieves, we're talking about eid zomem. We want to find a nafkamina within the eid zomem case, but this is going to say that if we compare it, eid zomem to gazlan, what if someone's a gazlan? Well, if someone's a gazlan, we're obviously going to do it from the moment they stole, right? There is no chidush, okay? But if we do it from the moment they stole, and we say it's pseida de lekuchot, then you're still going to have an issue because if you go back to the moment they stole, again, nobody knew they stole on January 1st. It only became public in February when there was a trial. And then, they were convicted of stealing. So if we say that anything that these thieves signed on between January and February, it's going to be an issue, right? Because nobody knew. So if the issue is pseida de lekuchot, Rava would actually say the same thing in a gazlan case. But if it's the issue of the chidush, that's only true for eid zomem. And then he would agree with Abaye in a case of gazlan. Of course, the guy was a rasha from the beginning. Okay? So that would be a nafkamina. But it's a weird nafkamina because nafkaminas are usually within that case. And here we're talking about something entirely different. And there's some questions and some different answers given, but we're going to stick with that way of reading it. But I'm a Rabbi Yomi Amitif. Okay, so right now we have the machloket. The structure is very simple. Eid zomem lemafrea, Abaye says, right? We go retroactively from the moment they testified. According to the second opinion, right, Rava, we're going to go only from the moment they're convicted. One explanation for Abaye, two explanations for Rava. What's enough coming between the two explanations? Now we're going to see who we paskin like. I'm a Rabbi Yirmi Amidifti, Avid Rav Papi Uvada Kevate de Rava. Okay, Rabbi Yirmi Difti testifies or says to us that Rav Papi did like Rav, held like Rava. There was a case where the Edim Zomimim were disqualified, and he only disqualified their testimony from the time that they were convicted. But Marbar of Ashi Amar Hilchata Kavate de Abaye. Marbar of Ashi ruled opposite and said we hold like Abaye. And comes the Gemara and tells us Hilchata Kavate de Abaye be Ya'al Kegam. Ya'al Kegam is the big way to remember. Ya'al Kegam, Yud is Yeush Shalom Midat. That's when you find a lost item and you don't know yet if the owner gave up their rights and said, oh, I'm never going to find my item anymore. So that's called Yeush Shalom Midat. And as we don't know what happened yet. We don't know if they had Yeush. According to Abaye, you can only take it if you know the owners gave up on ever finding it again. It's actually a very complicated opinion because how do you know if you don't know who lost the item, then you don't know whether they gave up their rights and then they come up with all sorts of ways to explain Abaye, but we actually hold like him. Okay, Eid Zomem, that's our case. Ayin. Lamed is Lechi Homei Me'elav. If there's a Lechi already standing, this is for Eruvin. Kuf is Kiddushin Shalonim Sirula Bi'ad. This is when someone betroths one of two sisters and he's not sure who he betrothed. He cannot actually engage in relationships with either one of them because it's possible he's betrothed to the sister. So it's Kiddushin that can never actually end up with bi'ah. So the question is, does he have to give her a get or not? Because maybe it's not even kiddushin anymore. So they have a machloket about that. Gilui milta beget. Okay, if somebody says that was the case where the woman was weaving and the husband sent a get, right? The guy said, and then the woman said, I'm busy, come back tomorrow, don't give me the get now. And then the husband said, oh, Baruch Hatov Amitiv. Like when the shaliach came back, he said, thank God you didn't give it to her, right? But he didn't say, I didn't want to give it to her. So the question is, did he cancel the get or did he not cancel the get? He kind of indicated, but was that enough to say the get is canceled or do you need to actually say the get is canceled? And mem is the next case. Okay, I told you we're going to have two. So let's move on to the next case. Mumar ochel nevelot leteavon. If somebody eats treif, okay, they eat non-kosher meat. Why? Leteavon, because they desire it, okay? Desire it could mean they desire it because they just really, really want to eat non-kosher meat. Or they desire it because it's just cheaper, right? We know the kosher meat costs a lot of money and they'd rather spend less money on it and save their money. These are people who either their desires will get the better of them and someone will tempt them with money next time and they'll take it, or because they want for the cheap, they want to go for the cheap item and they're willing to do something that's forbidden by Torah law, then very likely if someone offers them money to lie under oath, they might do that. So everybody agrees divrei kol pasul. For sure, someone like that is pasul. That's not the machloket. The machloket is lahachis. What if somebody does it just because? Okay, they're going against God, right? I'm angry with God. I don't care. I'm just going to eat non-kosher meat. So Abaye Amar pasul. Now this isn't someone who has any sort of malintent to, they're not looking for money. This isn't a money related issue. On the other hand, they're a rasha because they're eating treif meat, right? For just because and just to go against God. So Abaye says pasul. That's a rasha. Rava Amal kashil. So let's explain why. Just like we had the machloket before, we got their opinions, then we explain them. Abaye Amal pasul the havile rasha. V'Rachman Amal al tashet rasha. Here they don't even bother going through the whole drasha. They just quote the drasha on it, not the pasuk, right? Al tashet etchan rasha liot ed. Right? What do they say? Al tashet rasha. Right? Where they skip words and they basically say read the pasuk as a rasha cannot be a witness. He's a rasha, or she's a rasha. Rava, right? In this cases, I'm going to go with the male because women really can't be edim except for in unique cases. Okay, that's a whole thing we're going to get to. That there's no really great explanation for it or a great way to understand it, but women in general can't be witnesses. Rava Amar Kashel, Rasha de Hamas Be'inan. Rava says it's only Rasha of Hamas. It says in that pasuk, Liot Eg Hamas. What is Hamas? Someone who, remember, Hamas is someone who goes, right? Not Hamas of modern day. Hamas is someone who goes and grabs an item, forces the seller to sell it when the seller doesn't really want to sell it, and gives them money for it. Okay, that's someone who wants money, right? In the end, they do pay money, right? We saw that just before, even though they pay money, but they're taking it by force and they're desiring things, and that's a problem. So it has to have to do with money. Okay. Meitive. Now we're going to bring a difficulty on Rava and then difficulty on Abaye. So the first difficulty is on Rava. A Tannaitic source. Al tashet rasha ed, al tashet Hamas ed. Okay, this is again two readings of the pasuk where we're cutting words and we're putting things together. But it says don't be a rasha who's an aid, but it also says don't have an aid someone who's Hamas, which means so it has. So now we're going to see what is included in this rasha and this Hamas. Elu gazlanim, okay, thieves. That clearly has to do with money. Umo alim b'shvuot, and those who lie falsely under oath. Now, oaths, notice it's plural here, so it must be relating to two different types of oaths. Well, there are monetary oaths, but there's also not monetary oaths. So the Gemara says here, my la v'chad shvuat shav v'chad shvuat mamon. Does this not include also people who just lie falsely, not having to do with money, and also people who lie having to do with money, right? Take these oaths that are false oaths having to do with money. So what do you see here? It sounds like it goes against Rava because here they give an example of something, assuming the shvuah relates to also shvuat shav, like just an unnecessary shvuah. Then it sounds like it's not only mamonot, it's any rasha. Lo, now you don't have to explain it that way. You could say idi v'idi shvuat b'mon. When it says shvuot, it could mean all monetary oaths. My shvuot, why does it say it in plural then if it doesn't mean two different types? Shvuot alma, it's just talking about anyone who lies falsely under oath having to do with money. But it's talking about oaths of many people that lie falsely under oath. So it could be read that way, in which case there's really not such difficulty against Rava. Well, here comes the question on Abaye. Meitive. Al tashet rasha aid, al tashet Hamas aid. Same beginning. But now it says, Elu gazlanim u'milavei ribiot. These are thieves and people who take money with interest, usurers. And this is only, notice, there's nothing here that doesn't have to do with money. So this is a clear contradiction to Abaye. And in fact, the Gemara ends with tiyuvta to Abaye tiyuvta. This difficulty with Abaye is a serious difficulty. Okay, can't really be answered. Meaning, Abaye has a problem with this bright. Now, it's very strange because you already know, even though the Gemara didn't tell us this, that although it did tell us Al Kagam already, and we know that Mem is this case, it's very strange that we brought a difficulty with Rava, we resolved it. We brought a difficulty against Abaye, and we didn't resolve it, and yet we're going to paskin like Abaye. So we're going to come back to this question soon. First, the Gemara wants to suggest Nema Kitanai. We're going to bring another Tannaitic Machloket that we're going to think is parallel to this one. Okay, Abaye and Rava are going to break down into Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Ed zomem pasul l'chol Torah kula divrei Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, if you lie under oath falsely at any given point, right, and you become an ed zomem, you get knocked out in court, and we think you're a false witness, You can't testify about anything in the Torah. What this is going to mean is, even if, let's say it was a monetary case, we've already set up in the beginning of the Masechet, the monetary cases are obviously much lighter than capital cases. Anyone could tell you that, right? You would have known that had you not learned our Masechet. And yet, what he's going to say is, let's say you testified in a monetary case falsely, we're going to assume that you would also testify in a capital case falsely, even though you wouldn't necessarily make that connection, right? Someone might have no problem taking money to lie falsely to make someone pay extra money, okay? But they wouldn't necessarily do that in a capital case. Comes from me and says, look, you lied under oath, we don't trust you at all. Rabbi Yossi Omer Bamed Dvarim Amurim. In which case is this talking about? Shuhuzam b'dinei nefashot. If you were in a capital case and you lied, then yes, we'll say you're pasul for anything in the Torah. Aval huzam b'dinei mamonot kasher l'dinei nefashot. Okay, but just like I said a minute ago, right, against Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi says only if you testify in a dinei nefashot case will we pasul you for everything. But if you testified in a monetary case, we're going to actually trust you in a capital case. We don't think you're going to lie. So what does this have to do with Abaye and Rava? Well, Nema Abaye ke Rabbi Meir, Rava ke Rabbi Yossi. Why? Abaye ke Rabbi Meir da'amal. Now here we're going to categorize them and we'll explain the similarity. Da'amrina mikula l'chumra. Rabbi Meir says you do something kal, we're not going to trust you for something chamur. You do something light, like lie, not that it's light, but it's lighter, lie in a monetary case, we're not going to trust you for a capital case. That's Rabbi Meir. How does that fit with Abaye? Your mumar ochel nevelo lahachis, which is bad but not terrible. Now, why is it not terrible? Well, the Gemara is going to talk about later in these terms, so let's already start with them. When you eat treif meat, okay, lahachis, just because you're angry at God and you just don't want to keep religion, that's between you and God. There's no humans affected by your action other than yourself. But if you testify falsely under oath, that is both bad for God, rala shamayim, because you're doing something against the Torah, and rala briot, because you're affecting other people by your false testimony. So that's much worse. So comes Abaye and says, we're going to go l'kula l'chumra, because you've done something that's only somewhat bad, because it's only rala shamayim, we're going to assume that you would also do something that's both rala shamayim and rala briot, okay? Whereas it's an interesting logic here, that the other option is going to say no, okay? Just because Rava Damar ke Rabbi Yossi, let's just play it out and we'll read it and then we'll explain it. Damar michumra lekula amrina, but mikula lechumra lo amrina. We're going to go from, if you do something really bad, we're going to assume you do something less bad. But if you do something not so bad, we're not going to assume you're going to do something worse. So how do we get that? Again, Rabbi Yossi says, just because you lied in a monetary case doesn't mean you're going to lie in a nefashot case. Only if you lie in a nefashot case will we assume you would lie in a mamonot case. And Rava says, just because you ate non-kosher meat, that was only between you and God. It doesn't mean you're going to do something that's bad for other people, right? The assumption here is you might not care about God because both are against God. So obviously you don't care about God. But to do something that's going to hurt other people, we're not necessarily assuming you would do that just because you do something against you and God, right? You're in a community and you care for other people and not, you might not care for God, but you might not want to hurt other people. So therefore, just because you do something against God alone doesn't mean you're going to do something against other people. So that's Rava and Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so now that's the way the Gemara thinks. Everything lines up very nicely. But then the Gemara says lo, and we knew that because it started with Nema. Nema is a suggestion. Let's suggest that it's a machlok tanim, but they always reject those. Lo, aliba de Rabbi Yossi. In other words, again, when they say Nema, if they're not going to reject it, they say kitanai. This is like a machlok tanim. But if they say let us say, they're actually going to reject it. So let's say they say now no. Aliba de Rabbi Yossi kule amalo pligi. Okay, if you go with Rabbi Yossi, who basically says that, right, if you did something wrong, dina mamonot, we're not going to think that you're going to lie in a capital crime. Okay, what does it mean, lo pligi? Well, it means there's no way to explain that they both agree with Rabbi Yossi and disagree within what Rabbi Yossi says. Because there's no way to explain Abaye like Rabbi Yossi. Okay, it's impossible. Because Abaye, if he would have held like Rabbi Yossi, he would have said differently by us. But ki pliga leva de Rabbi Meir. But what we can say is that perhaps both Abaye and Rava agree with Rabbi Meir and disagree with what Rabbi Meir would say by us. And we would distinguish between the cases. Abaye ke Rabbi Meir, that we already said, because we're going to say mikula lechumra. We're going to say because you did something light, we can assume you're going to do something more stringent. Rava is going to say the following. Akan lo ka'amar Rabbi Meir hatam ela gabe ed zomem de mamon. Dira la shamayim v'ra la briot. Now, while ed zomem de mamon is less harsh than ed zomem de nefashot, but it already has ra la shamayim and ra la briot. It's got both those things already. So it might not be as bad as capital crime, but it's already showing this person doesn't care about God and doesn't care about other people. And therefore, we're not going to accept them for a capital crime. Aval hacha, but in our case, again, has no effect on anybody else. It's not bad for anyone else. It's only just bad against God. So maybe Rabbi Meir wouldn't think that you wouldn't be trusted in court because you've never shown that you would do something against other people. Okay, and therefore, it's not necessarily that they argue, right? That they line up that Rabbi Meir, right? Rava would only hold like Rabbi Yossi, and Abaye would only hold like Rabbi Meir. No, Abaye for sure holds like Rabbi Meir. The question is, can Rava be explained according to Rabbi Meir as well? And therefore we're finished. Okay, we rejected that possibility. Okay, now what do you mean? How do you know the reason the witness lied? We don't know the reason the witness lied, but we know that the witness isn't doing anything again, the witness who lies in a monetary case, whether they intended it that way or not, but they're doing something against God and they're doing something against other people. In other words, there's ramifications of your actions. It doesn't matter what you were thinking, but there's ramifications of your action against God and against people. So that's the issue here. So now the Gemara says, Hilchata kapatei Abaye. I already told you, we're going to paskin like Abaye here. V'hai totiv. But the Gemara says, but wait, go back for a minute. Didn't we just say that Abaye was knocked out? That Breita. So the answer, who Rabbi Yossi? That Breita goes according to Rabbi Yossi, so it doesn't bother us. Yes, it's a knockout to Abaye, but that's because it holds by Rabbi Yossi's position. And we already said that Abaye and Rabbi Yossi don't work together no matter what. So that's the way we can explain that Breita. So it doesn't resolve it. It just says that Breita shouldn't bother us because that Breita is Rabbi Yossi and Abaye doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, wait, still we're going to have a problem. Because V'tavi Nami, I would ask the following question. Rabbi Yossi for Rabbi Meir, we have a principle. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Meir disagree. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. Sorry, I didn't read it right. V'tahavi Nami Rabbi Yossi, they said, even if you were to say that right as Rabbi Yossi, we have a problem, which is Rabbi Meir for Rabbi Yossi, halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. Anytime Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi disagree, we pass like Rabbi Yossi. So it might be very nice, say that Breita is not going to bother us, but we should pass like Rabbi Yossi. And Abaye goes against Rabbi Yossi. So we have a problem. To which the Gemara answers, and it's going to take us to the middle of Amud Bet to understand this answer. Shane hatam destam lan tanika Rabbi Meir. This case is different. What are these principles for? These principles are for when we don't have something else to tell us. But there's another principle. The other principle says, if you have an unattributed Mishnah, meaning there's no debate, and it doesn't say who says it, we assume we paskin that way. And there's a Stam Mishnah that goes like Rabbi Meir, which means that in that case, in our case, we're going to paskin like Rabbi Meir, which means that we can say the Breita that's bothering us is like Rabbi Yossi. We don't hold that way. Okay. Now, what we have left to figure out is Hecha Stamlan. Where is this Mishnah that is unattributed and is like Rabbi Meir? So to get that, we're going to get a story where a similar thing happened, and now ours is just a theoretical argument. This is an actual case that happened. Okay, you're going to start to see. Kihad bar Chama, that was his name. Katal nafsh. He was a murderer. He killed somebody. Amar le Reish Galuta the Rav Abba bar Yaakov puk ayemba. So the Reish Galuta, the exilarch, says, go check out the situation to Rav Abba. Right? Go find some witnesses. Ivadai katil. If he really killed, lachuyu le'ene. Take out his eyes. Okay. Why the eyes? It's not so clear what this means. Okay. They didn't have capital punishment anymore. Whatever he meant give him a serious crime. I'm not going to get into it. There's all different opinions, but I want to stick to the main part of the daf. Atu tre sade. Two witnesses come forward. Asidu be devadai katal. And they said this guy definitely murdered, and now they have proof. But what happened? Azal iu. So Bar Chama goes, and what does he do? Ate tre sade. He brings two witnesses. Asidu be becha mehanach. Okay, and then these witnesses testified, each one about a different one of his witnesses. Each one testified about one of his witnesses. So each one said something a little different, but each one disqualified, let's say, witness A. So Chanamar Kamei Didi Ganav Kabed Chushla. One said, I saw this person steal a kav of seorim, of barley. V'chan amar kabedidi ganav kata debortia. And the second one says, before me, I saw him steal a handle of a spear. And we're now in Amud Bet. So now we have two witnesses that knock out one of the witnesses. Now, if one witness is knocked out, you can't convict him with one witness. So basically, this bar chama is going to go out scot-free because witnesses are canceled. So Amar Le, my da'atech ki Rabbi Meir. But wait, notice, what are they disqualified for? For stealing, right? They're thieves. Now, thieves, just because they stole doesn't mean that they would lie in a capital crime, right? Maybe in a mamonot, but not in a capital crime. Like they don't care about other people's money, but maybe they care about people's lives. So Amar Le, so they said to him, my da'atech, what are you gonna? What's your opinion? Can Rabbi Meir, what you want to disqualify these witnesses based on Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir for Rabbi Yossi, alachak Rabbi Yossi. For Rabbi Yossi, right? We have this principle. Okay, now we're going to basically review the same sugya we said, because the same sugya came in this story, in this discussion. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, we hold like Rabbi Yossi. For Rabbi Yossi ha'amar, who's am b'dinei mamono, kasher l'dinei nefashot. If you had an issue with a dinei mamono case, it doesn't necessarily mean you lie in a dinei nefashot case. Amarle Rav Papi. Rav Papi comes and says, no, Hane Mila Hechadelo Stam Tana ke Rabbi Meir. Hacha Stam Lantana ke Rabbi Meir. That thing about Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir, that's only when you don't have a Stam Mishnah. But if you have an unattributed Mishnah that holds like Rabbi Meir, we're going to hold like Rabbi Meir. So basically, we've said nothing new. It's just that we saw it within a story. And the story is going to continue because within the story, in that court, while they were having this deliberation, then they asked the same question we did, which is, Mimai, where's that Mishnah? What Mishnah are we talking about? Elema, if you want to say now, again, just like Nema is always going to be rejected, Elema is also. If you want to say this, no, that doesn't prove Rabbi Meir. So let's try the first Mishnah. Mehad itnana Mishnah Masechet Nida. Kol ra'oi ledun dinei nefashot, ra'oi ledun dinei mamonot. Anyone who can be a judge. Now here we're not talking about witnesses, judges, but maybe you can make the comparison. And we're going to say, no, this is something totally different. But anyone who can judge in a capital crime can also judge in a monetary crime. Mane, who is this? Ilema Rabbi Yossi. If you say it's Rabbi Yossi, ha'ika ed zomem de mamon, de kasher lidinei nefashot pasul lidinei mamonot. If you say anyone who could be in a capital crime can be in a mamonot crime, according to Rabbi Yossi, that's not true. If you can testify in a monetary crime, it doesn't necessarily mean, right? I'm sorry. If you can't testify in a monetary case, you can testify in an official case, according to Rabbi Yossi, right? According to Rabbi Meir, you can't, because once you lie, you lie across the board, right? We don't trust you. So if you're going to say Rabbi Yossi, hagi eid zomem de mamon de kasher l'dinei nefashot u'pasul l'dinei mamonot, right? You can testify in capital crime, you can't testify in monetary crime. Now it's true they're not talking about testimony. They're talking about judges. But they're trying to compare. It's a bad comparison anyway, and they're going to reject it for the following reason. But first, they're going to say, Lalav, it must be Rabbi Meir, who thinks that once you can't testify in one, you can't testify in the other. They say, Mimai, why would you say that? Dilma b'psule yuchsin kai. This must be talking about psule yuchsin. What are psule yuchsin? There's certain people, because of their lineage, like, for example, a convert and a mamzer, are not allowed to testify, to be a judge. That's why I said this issue has to do with judges. They're not allowed to be judges in capital crimes, but they are allowed to be judges in monetary crimes. So why is that? Because monetary crimes are less serious. So we're going to allow them, and that's the line. Okay, we're going to say, if your lineage is good enough, meaning you're not a ger, you're not a convert, you're not a mamzer. Okay, we're going to get to that whole sugya when we get there. But you're not a ger, you're not a mamzer, so you can do dinei nefashot. Well, then obviously you can do dinei mamonot. We don't need to do a further check because obviously you're good to do dinei mamonot. So now, so they say the ilo temahachi. If you don't say it psule yuchsin, then the next line is going to make no sense. In other words, we don't yet have proof that that's the way to read it, but now we're going to prove that that's the only way to read it. Because look at the next line. Seifa de Katani, at the end of that Mishnah, it says, Yesh ra'oi ladun dinei mamonot, ve'ein ra'oi ladun dinei nefashot. There are some people who can be dayanim in monetary cases, and they can't be in dinei nefashot. Abaye no ra'oi. Now, if you go back to our original and you think it's because they were knocked out of dinei mamonot, well, if they were knocked out of dinei mamonot and they can testify for dinei nefashot, then you wouldn't say, right, they can do dinei mamonot, they can't do dinei nefashot. It's the opposite. Okay? Right? If you were knocked out and you can't do dinei nefasha, you of course can't do dinei mamonot. Okay? Everybody agrees that that's disqualified. That wasn't their machloket. Must be that line is telling you if you there are some people who can do dinei mamonot like a ger, like a comfort, like a mamzer, but they can't do dinei nefasha, they can't do capital crimes, and that's right, and that's yuchsin. So that line has to be yuchsin, which means the previous line has to be yuchsin, in which case that's not our Mishnah. Okay. Ella. Okay. We mentioned a few things today that are very difficult to swallow, which is that a ger and a mamzer can't judge certain cases and women can't testify. And these are big issues. And unfortunately, there's not great answers for them. It's one of those very difficult sugyot, and we're going to get there more head on and deal with it head on, but don't expect me to give you great answers because they're hard to understand. The only thing is you can understand within their society and certain things, but it's hard to understand. Okay. Elahacha kastam tanalan. Okay, here's the stam lantana. Here's the Mishnah. Ditnan. Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, where they were talking about what witnesses could be accepted to testify about the new moon. Elu hana psulim. Hamesachik b'kubiyam elavei b'ribit. This sounds like our Mishnah. Mafrichei yonim socharei shvi'it. Ve'ha'avadim. We didn't have avadim in ours. And Canaanite slaves. All those people can't testify. Zeh ha'klal. Here's the rule. Here we got to get to testimony of a woman. Kol edut she'en ha'isha kshera. Anytime we won't accept a woman's testimony, which is dinei mamonot, dinei ishut, marriage, divorce. Okay, only in like aguna cases and unique cases we'll allow it. Like if they want to testify that a man died and the woman can get remarried, things like that. But generally no, and not dinei nefashot, for example. They can't testify about capital crimes. So when a woman can't testify, ein af hein ein kshevrima. All these others can't testify. Here you have it. Mane, right? Who is this? Elam or Rabbi Yossi. If it's Rabbi Yossi, ha'ike edu b'dinei nefashot. When it comes to capital crimes, the milavei ribid and the misachik kubiyah, all those people can testify, but ena yishak sheirala, but the women can't testify, right? And therefore, v'henk sheirima, they are. So it doesn't work according to Rabbi Yossi. Elalav Rabbi Meir. That Mishnah must be Rabbi Meir. In which case, right? They basically now remember we're still in the story. Brachama's in court. They're trying to convict him. His witnesses were knocked out. But they were knocked out for money things, not for capital crime, right? Maybe we'll accept them for capital crime, because just because they, stole money doesn't necessarily mean we won't accept them for capital crime. But comes basically Rav Papi and says, no. There's a stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir. We hold like Rabbi Meir. Once they're disqualified for any kind of case. Kam Bar Chama Nashke Akare. So Bar Chama gets up and kisses because now Bar Chama is scot-free. He goes free because we've canceled the witnesses. He bows down, he kisses the feet of Rav Papi. Different interpretations about this means. It sounds like he took upon himself to pay his taxes for the rest of his life. Okay. Next Mishnah. Elohein hakrovim. Now we're going to get to krovim, and for this we have our presentation from Canva. Okay, for those, like I said, from Yavamot, this will remind you of our Yavamot ones. It's not so complicated, but I just thought it was nice to kind of show everything. So what I did was I took Tanakh characters, so like brothers, like Yaakov and Esav. Okay, Yaakov is our main character in all of these. He's the one who's the main person that we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about all his relatives. He can't testify for them, and they can't testify for him. Now, the way the Mishnah is built, there's 10 cases. 9 of them are right. 1, 2. I think it's 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10, but 9 of them, and I bolded it here. Haim ubnehem b'chotnehem. We're going to mention the character, who's the relative of Yaakov that can't testify for him, like Achiv. Okay, his brother Esav, and not only Esav, but him, his son, who's Eliphaz, and his daughter. Wherever they didn't have a name, I called them daughter, and Sil, son-in-law. Okay, Esav's son-in-law, the daughter's husband. Okay, so we have basically. All these people can't testify for Yaakov, and Yaakov can't testify for them. Okay, that's our cases. So Achiv, so his brother Esav, and Esav's son, and Esav's son-in-law. Okay, next. Achi Aviv, okay, the brother of his father. So that's easy. Yitzchak is his father. Yishmael is his brother. So Yishmael's son, and his daughter's husband. Okay. Achi Imo. Okay, now we get to his mother, which is Rivka, her brother, which happens to be Lavan. Lavan we're going to see otherwise because Lavan's also his father-in-law, but we're going to get to him later as father-in-law. So Rivka's brother and Lavan's son and his daughter's husband. Okay. Baal Achoto, Yaakov's sister and her sister's husband. That's his brother-in-law. Okay, but we're going to have brother-in-law otherwise. Okay, but this is his sister's husband. Later, we're going to have his wife's. Okay, we're going to have like from the wife's side, a brother-in-law. Okay, so now the sister's husband and the son and the son-in-law. Okay, which is basically also his sister's his children. Baal Achot Aviv. Okay, now we get to, you notice some of these are on the same generation and some of them are up a generation or down, right? Or then they end up going down a generation. Notice, I want you to notice, because we're going to get back to this, there's no three generations here, although we will get to three generations. Okay, what's missing? I forgot to mention this, but the biggest case that's missing is the father, right? What happened to the father? So they say, some people say the father's just so obvious they don't even bother mentioning it, and we're going to see this whole source comes from fathers. So clearly the father's pasul, obviously. Okay, Balachot Aviv, the husband to the sisters, to the father's sister. So Yitzchak had a sister, let's say, and her husband would be a pasul, and again, his son and his son-in-law, his daughter's husband. Balachot Imo, same thing, but not through his father, through his mother, Rivka's sister, and her husband, and their children, and the son-in-law. Okay, Baal Imo. What if his mother Rivka was married to somebody else? I'm sorry. No, I didn't say that right. Baal Imo. Yeah, Rivka was married to someone else. Let's say after Yitzchak died, Rivka married somebody else. And then he had children, right? Otherwise, it would be his mother's children. But he had children, let's say, from another marriage, and the son and the son-in-law from that marriage. Anyone related to the wife's husband. Okay, I'm sorry, the mother's husband. Then we have Chamiv. Okay, Chamiv is his father-in-law. In this case, it's Lavan. Like I said, he appears twice. But Lavan, his son and son-in-law. I want to point out some of these people repeat because they end up being also related in other ways. Okay, but like here, Lavan's son is also the brother of his wife, right? Okay, like the geese. We're going to get to the geese soon. The geese is the brother-in-law here. Okay, the who happens to be the son-in-law of Lavan, who's also the brother-in-law of Yaakov. Okay, so we're going to get to him in another minute. He comes twice, really. But he comes twice because here he's just the Chatan, and in the next case, he's the main person, the geese, okay, which is here, Leah's sister's husband. That's the exact same character we just saw, but he was the son-in-law before because he's the son-in-law of Lavan. Now also him and his son and his son-in-law. Okay, so again, Leah's sister. Okay, geese. Rashi specifically says geese could have been someone else also. But here the geese is his, because brother-in-law, you could have a lot of different brothers-in-law. Rashi says, and questions there are other opinions, but Rashi says the geese is Yaakov's wife's sister's husband. Okay? So Leah had another sister. I mean, she had Rachel, but we're not talking about her because she was married to Yaakov. But some other sister who was married to somebody else, and they had a son and a son-in-law as well. Okay? All those people, them and the son-in-law and all that. Then the Chorgo Levado. Okay, so that goes to the end of the words, right? Hem b'nehem chodnehem. Now we have Chorgo Levado. So I just want to point out for all of those 9 characters, and including also the father, by the way, it includes that person and then the two, right? The son and the son-in-law underneath them. Now we're going to get to if Yaakov had a wife and then she had had a previous marriage with somebody else and had a stepson. So Chorgo Levado. The stepson is forbidden also to testify for Yaakov, and Yaakov can't testify for the stepson, but Levado meaning none of the Chotnehem and B'nehem. Okay, it's just the son-in-law himself. Okay, now I'm a Rabbi Yossi Zo Mishnah Rabbi Akiva. This is all Rabbi Akiva, what we just learned. Aval Mishnah Rishonah previously, before Rabbi Akiva came along, it was different. It wasn't as many. Dodo uben dodo, the uncle and the cousin, v'chol ha'ra'oi liyorsho, and anyone who inherits. It was only based on inheritance, which means we're going to get rid of, and there's a whole debate which one, so I'm not going to get into all the details, but going to get rid of anyone who's related through people who don't inherit, which are always the women, okay? The wives, the sisters, okay? The mother, all the ones that come through the aunt through the mother, right? Or the mother's sister. All those are out, okay? Okay, now this is only going to include people. Okay, why it has to do with Yerusha? 3 reasons. Okay, I'll go very quickly. Either because they're nogeh b'davar, because they can inherit one from the other, so they have a vested interest in this person's money. That's the most obvious. Some people say because the pasuk we're going to learn it all from talks about the father, and the father is ro'ili or show, not the mother. Or some people say, we learned this in Baba Batra, mishpachat av karoi mishpacha, mishpachat em is not mishpacha, and krovim are mishpacha, and the mother's side is not considered family. Okay, but they changed that, and they added also the women as well. Now, when it's through marriage, all these people who are related through marriage, like the sons-in-law, for example, so only if they're still married. If they're not married anymore, then they're not. If they were related, but then not anymore. But Rabbi Yehuda says, now, if your daughter died, and there's right, the chatan's no longer related, the son-in-law, but if they have children, then they are still connected to you. So then Rabbi Yehuda thinks who's still hareza karov, that would still be a problem. Ha'ohev v'hasoneh, someone you're really close friend, or someone you really hate, also you can't testify. So what is ohev? Zeshush bino, that's someone who was part of your wedding entourage. And soneh, koshalo diberi mosh shayamim be'eva. If you don't speak to someone for 3 days out of anger, that would be a soneh. You can't testify for them. Now this is still Rabbi Yehuda speaking. Amrula, the rabbi said to him, Lo nachshud Yisrael al kakno. We think people might lie for relatives. We don't think people are going to lie for their close friend or their biggest enemy. Okay, now Rashi points out, though, for sure you can't judge someone who's your enemy because you won't try to find l'kaf zchut, right? To exonerate them. Okay, Minani Mile. The Gemara asks, where do we get this all from? Ditanu Rabbanan lo yumtu avot al banim. Okay, this is a very famous pasuk. Ubanim lo yumtu al avot. Ish bechet'o yumatu. Okay, it's pasuk in Tvarim. Right? People die for their own sins. Fathers don't die for their sons' sins. Sons don't die for their father's sins. If it means what we think it means, the simple reading, children won't die for their father's sins and fathers won't die for their sons' sins. The end of that pasuk says, everyone dies for their own sin. You don't need the beginning to be telling you that. Here you see it. Source is all about fathers. Fathers, presumably they say a father and his brother won't die because of the testimony of their children. And that already teaches you the main, the first beginning ones. Okay? And that's how they understand the pasuk. Now they're just going to ask a few questions off topic, not about krovim, but about these psukim. We just said ishbachato yumatu, which means nobody dies for other people's sins. But don't we have a pasuk that says we do? Ubanim ba'avon avot lo v'haktiv poked avon avot al banim. The sins of fathers go to the children. That's only when the children go in the ways of the father. If they go in their father's evil ways, they could die for their father's sins. Kedetanya, as it says in the following bright, and that's what we're going to prove here. A different pasuk. The sons will basically rot because of the sins of their fathers. That's when they continue in their father's ways. This is a very famous question. Okay, very famous sugya. The bride continues. Really? When they do? Maybe they die for their father's sins even if they don't continue in their father's way. Well, now you have to change the word here. Right? They basically say there's two different psukim. One says you only die for your own sins. So it must be, one is if you go in the way of your father, you'll die with their sins. If you don't go in the way of your father, you won't die from their sins. And that's basically reconciling these contradictory psukim. Last thing, v'lo v'aktiv v'kashlu ish b'achiv, ish ba'avon achiv. Another famous pasuk. People will fall because of others. And what do we learn from this? You'll die because of the sin of someone else. We're all responsible one for the other. We always talk about this. That's if they could have protested and they didn't. This is very interesting because it goes back to yesterday's story. It shows that if you don't protest an action when you could have, someone's doing a sin, you basically bear that sin yourself. And that's why Rish Lakish was so upset about those rabbis. Okay, and that's the pasuk v'kashlu ish b'achiv. So we have three things really. We have children who die for their father's sins when they continue in their ways. We have everybody dies for their own sins, no one else's sins. That's when you don't continue in their ways. But you could even be responsible not only for your father's sins, but for other people's sins if you don't stop them from doing something when you really could. And that's the end of our daf. Very quick review. We dealt with zomem lemafrer or lahabu nifsal, famous machloket Abaye Rava. We dealt with the second famous machloket muarchel nevelo lahachis. Yes, pasul, not pasul. We compared it to that other machloket. And then we passed on like Abaye in both these cases, and then we got to Krovim, what relatives are forbidden, and what was the source, and we saw banim, right? Avot lo yimtu al banim, lo yimtu avot al banim, banim al avotam. Okay, and that means basically testimony, even though that's definitely not the simple reading of the pasuk. Wishing everyone a good day, and Shema B'Sarot Tova.